Hey, this is David Plotz, CEO of CityCast. I have a favor to ask before we get to today's conversation. We're doing our annual listener survey, and it would really help us out if you took it. And even if you took it last year, we'd be grateful if you took it again, because we can't use last year's data. Please go to citycast.fm/survey to take the survey. It's only 7 minutes long, we know, because we timed it. That's citycast.fm/survey. And when you take the survey, you'll also be eligible to win a $250 Visa gift card and CityCast swag, that great CityCast swag. citycast.fm/survey.
Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about Mayor Keith Wilson's plan to end unsheltered homelessness, the closing of a busy DMV location due to the smell of raw sewage and other terrible site conditions, and the Portland chefs and restaurants nominated for this year's James Beard Awards. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are CityCast Director of Digital Strategy, Bryan Vance, and our very own executive producer, John Notarianni. It's Friday, January 24th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the Friday News Roundup. Bryan, John, thank you for hanging out with me this morning.
Hey, Claudia.
Hey, good to be back.
For those of you new to the show, today is the day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. But before we jump into the news, I usually ask an opening question so our listeners can get to, know our guests a little bit better. And today's opening question is actually related to yesterday's episode. If you didn't catch it, Portland comedian Jay Fluelling joined us and shared some of his comedy pals' pettiest gripes about our city. And since we mainly heard from our local comedy scene, I wanted to open up the floor. So Bryan and John, what is your current Portland gripe?
Bryan, I feel like you should go first.
Okay, well, so this is, I mean, my whole life I've been training to be a grumpy old man, so this is perfect. I just got back from Columbus, where I grew up, and so my gripe is actually related to our pizza scene. We have every fucking kind of pizza you can imagine, except for a thin crust, like Midwestern edge-to-edge topping pizza. Jerry's Pizza Guy opens a tavern and doesn't even put pizza in his tavern. Like, what the heck is going on there? Like, why do we have types of pizza nobody's ever even asked for or thought of? And we have a bunch of Midwest transplants here, not from Detroit. Detroit pizza's great, but like we have a lot of Detroit pizza. Why can't we get some like Chicago tavern, Columbus style pizza? Is that really so hard?
Man, John, you caught a stray there.
I just don't understand the appeal of the like little crispy, brittle.
It's so good, John.
Tavern style pizza. I don't get it.
Pepperonis are different. They're like old world. They cup. They're like spicy.
Let me get this right, Bryan. Your Portland gripe is that there's not enough pizza.
There's too much pizza of all the other kinds, but we can't get a representative of the heartland of America.
My gripe would have been quite the opposite.
Bryan Vance from the land of Cincinnati chili.
No.
No, he's not. He's from Columbus.
I'm from Columbus.
How dare you, John?
The biggest city in Ohio. It is bigger than Cleveland and Cincinnati put together.
Look at a map, John.
We do not eat that shit.
But it's still the region, right?
No.
Oh my gosh.
No.
My Ohio family is going to
be
so disappointed in my mixing up my Ohio geographies.
I can't believe you said that, John, honestly.
Okay.
We don't eat that shit.
I'm going home.
Okay,
you guys got it from here.
All right, John. Here's your time to somehow shit on Columbus, Ohio. What's your Portland petty gripe?
So also food and drink related, drive-through coffee is a magical thing, and I'm glad that we have so much of it. And this is sort of a gripe that is shared both with the city and with like surrounding communities, especially when you get out to White Lake and you're going on a hike or somewhere outside of the city limits. You go to a drive-through coffee stand and they only have Americano espresso style drinks. And those coffees,
no drip,
and they're 211 degrees coming out of the tap. Like if you're drinking a cup of coffee in your car, you don't have time for it to cool down.
You also can't pop the lid off.
You don't want to drive around with an open, scalding cup of coffee in your car. It does not need to be that hot. And I think that it is a tragedy.
I have to agree with you, John, about the fact that people are just like, I'm sorry, we only make espressos here, And then like you taste the espresso and you're like, well, you should think about making other things because this is shitty espresso.
Maybe I don't understand espresso science. Why does it need to be that hot? Why does it need to be the hottest liquid that is humanly possible without immediately vaporizing?
Yeah.
Ugh.
Hotter than the sun. Well, you guys, my most recent extremely petty gripe with this city is that I've encountered too many people casually wearing flip-flops in the winter. And look, yeah, man, it's your body, your choice. But once I'm forced to look at your bare feet less than a foot away from me, I feel like you've now involved me. And it just feels like a look at me ploy on so many levels, but also just scientifically, like, all hate aside, it's stupid. Put some fucking socks and shoes on. You're going to get frostbite.
Yeah.
Stop being an ass. Also, no one wants to see your feet. And those who do, make them pay. Don't be giving that shit away for free.
So would you feel if it was an improvement or even worse to go the flip-flop plus socks route?
I mean, if you're German, you get a
it.
pass. But if you're American, you're being an ass again.
It's, just, I don't know. Cover up your fucking feet. It's cold outside.
It's cold out. Nobody wants to see them.
Mm-mm.
I mean, I have the same rant in the summer, so.
Claudia's gripe is feet.
Claudia has the opposite of a foot fetish.
I'm the anti-Quentin Tarantino. I'm like, ew, put them away. Anyhow, thank you both for your answers. On to the news of the week. John, is it true that your headline this week is also loosely based on another Alex Zielinski tweet like mine was last week?
Starting from an Alex Zielinski tweet, yeah, X is not dead. Definitely based on some reporting by Alex Zielinski, as well as Lillian Mongo Hughes and Shane Dixon Kavanaugh from The Oregonian, as well as some frantic YouTubing on my part last night of multi-hour city council meetings. Mayor Keith Wilson had a big reveal party for the new plan to end unsheltered homelessness by the end of this year. All of this happened on Wednesday. This has been discussed a ton. I mean, this was the cornerstone of his mayoral campaign. Now he's getting down to brass tacks, trying to figure out and get support for what his plan is going to be. I think the big headline is he thinks it's going to cost about $28 million. Hopes to add about 1,500 overnight-only shelter beds, as well as opening 4 new day centers across the city, 1 in each council district, along with some daytime storage facilities for people. There was a big meeting with local county and city officials on Wednesday morning, and then the aforementioned 3-hour afternoon work session with the city council as they try to hash this out. On top of that $28 million in initial startup costs, he's thinking it's going to take another $24 million to operate the shelters through June of 2027. And this is tricky because that's a big part of this $100 million budget shortfall that was announced at the end of last week that the city is facing in the next fiscal year. So yeah, there's a lot to wrangle here. Everybody's starting to sort of kick the tires and figure out what needs to happen and if this plan is viable, and how they're going to fund it, which is raising some interesting questions as well.
I mean, I'm glad to see the specifics because he's been talking about this since he announced his run for mayor. I actually think it's pretty well thought out. Like there's some really interesting stats in there about the difference in cost between the 24-hour shelter model that we have running right now, that is like exclusively what we have running right now, and how much that costs per person per day versus some of these night-only shelters. And I've seen a lot of pushback on like Blue Sky and other things, people saying like, we don't need this, we need permanent housing and stuff. I think the thing that some people are missing is Keith Wilson, at least as far as what I've seen in his plan and in his talk, he's not saying to not do those other things. He's saying we have ignored this very crucial part of the process. And so we have said that we will only do 24-hour housing, transitional housing, permanent housing. We will not do this thing that gets people off the street temporarily so they can start moving into those things. That's what he's calling for. And I actually think $28 million when we're staring down a $100 million budget hole, it does seem bad. But that's a lot cheaper than what we're spending on all the other things. If we can really give this a shot, I think it's worth trying. I think it's worth making some painful cuts elsewhere to give this a shot for year one to see if this can actually happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the pushback from other people is that because funds are limited, they worry that if we put our funds here, then the things that have been preached about this is what works, which is, permanent housing isn't going to get funded. And I think that's what the concern is, because this is $28 million for this first year and then $24 million the second year. And I do want to just point out that it's not just 1,500, it's 3,009 shelter beds. I'm not correcting you, John, because 1,500 of those have money, like they're funded. So it's like 3,000 new beds that are coming up. So that's a lot of people that will have overnight shelter, in the extremities, like when it's hot, when it's cold. So I don't know, because I totally see both sides. I see people being like, if we spend money, on these quick turnaround solutions, then we're not going to have like all this other money. And I have to agree with you, Bryan. I just think we need to start somewhere, because sitting on our hands and just watching people suffer is not.
It's not.
It's not. Yeah. It's already been 3 years with this perfect strategy that has not worked for us.
And I mean, it's actually been longer than that, right? Didn't Portland, according to some data that's out there, didn't we close our last like city funded overnight shelters in like 2018 or something like that?
That's true. Yeah.
So like we've tried the only permanent housing, only transitional housing model. It's part of a continuum of care, like you can't just put everything in one part of the basket. And I hear people's concerns, but it is a fraction of the money that is there. And I think it's worth trying. And nothing works if we can't compromise. Like we have people who are screaming about homeless encampments and quality of living in Portland, and they're absolutely right. And we have to compromise a little bit and like do something to start to address those concerns, while also treating homeless people like humans and providing them with a place to like actually be safe and warm, which is just something that we've completely abandoned as a community right now.
I think it is interesting looking at it both as just it's a lot of money and building a lot of new infrastructure that needs to be operated and all the concerns there. But also just sort of like a cultural change as well on behalf of the people who are going to be using these facilities, right? Because something that I thought was interesting, and it took me a minute to wrap my head around it, of the shelter beds that Multnomah County has online, about 90% they say were being used each night in 2024. Those are the 24-hour shelters. We have had about 200 overnight-only shelter beds come online within the last month or so. And the first couple weeks of them, only 36 to 48% of those beds are being used. So what that tells me is that we need to also have these things in place long enough for people to get used to them, for the people who would be using them to figure out how it fits into their daily routine, and to figure out the jump between like, okay, I go here for the overnight shelter, and then during the day, I either like take my things with me or put them in storage. And that's a tricky part too, that the city is going to be having to do a lot of communication and developing trust that like, if I put my things in storage, they're not just going to disappear into a warehouse somewhere or something.
Like we've covered.
Covered on the show, I mean, that's a different program, but I could see how it feels exactly the same. It's like, oh, you mean you want me to trust you that I put my backpack here and it'll be there when I come back? I don't know about that. So yeah, there's a lot more details to dig into here. And I think ultimately it is going to be a bit of a leap of faith on everyone's part, that this plan is actually going to work.
Yeah.
It's a really complicated system to put into place pretty quickly.
Yeah, the storage issue is real. And I think you mentioned it, but Mayor Wilson is also proposing that each district also open a single day shelter and storage facility. And I think you mentioned it, but just to like...
Inventory of a million other things I mentioned. Yeah.
There's a lot in there.
If people are just like, why is he talking about storage? Just because that's part of the plan. And I'm just curious, is that also part of the funding?
Yeah, the cost of that is supposed to be included in that figure.
Yeah, and I always wonder, the initial costs usually tend to be a lot higher because you're building a thing.
Yeah.
Did he at all speak about how, I know the second year is 24 million, which is 4 less. Is the following year going to be even less? Like, is there a prediction of it finally not being as expensive?
I mean, the pitch is that there's going to be cost savings over time doing it this way rather than going on a only 24-hour shelter model that we have so far.
Right.
Is that actually going to play out in reality? I don't think anyone knows. And, several city councilors were sort of poking Mayor Wilson on that during this work session of being like, well, how stable are these numbers? Like, can I see a spreadsheet of exactly how this spending would line up with exactly what we're spending right now? And like you said, a lot of this is based on estimates, and we know that these numbers very well could balloon in the future as well.
I do think it's worth pointing out, though, that there's a ramp up that they're planning for, and then a ramp down, a gradual ramp down. So part of the plan is that we will ramp up to offering, several thousand night shelter beds for a few years. But over time, through the work of those shelters and the continuum of care that we have of caseworkers, of transitional housing, of mental health and addiction treatment, the need for some of those beds will decrease over time and they'll turn offline. And so it's not necessarily that the savings, at least in the actual operations cost of the shelters, will go down in year 2 or year 3. But over time, yes, they are expected to go down if it works. That's the big asterisk here, if this works.
Yeah.
But we will never find out if we don't try it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, what did the city council, what was the vibe? Were they receptive or were they just like, yeah,
It was interesting. There was a lot of praise. There was a lot of commending Keith Wilson for putting forth a concrete idea and really pushing ahead.
Good.
I didn't see any flat out opposition. I saw a lot of people that were, again, worried about some of the nitty gritty details.
As they should be.
Dan Ryan was really digging into some of them. Councilor Angelita Murillo was digging into some of them. And a lot of people who were worried about how we're going to pay for it. Because at the end of the day, this is going to go into a budget that needs to get approved by city council. And these are the 12 people that are going to be on the hook of figuring out how to pay for this as well.
Thank you for sitting through that extra long council meeting.
My pleasure. I was thinking about your habit of crushing Taco Bell while doing it. And I was sad that I didn't think ahead to order Taco Bell. Next city council meeting will be sponsored by Living Moss.
I don't know why it works, but it works. All right. Well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, more headlines of the week. All right, Bryan, what caught your eye this week?
So my story comes from Jonathan Bach at The Oregonian. It is about the last remaining tenant in Mall 205 closing up shop. So the Oregon DMV, yes, there is an Oregon DMV location in what used to be a mall. It really hasn't been a mall for several years now. But there's an Oregon DMV location at Mall 205 that announced that at the end of this month, it is closing up shop, moving out due to repeated issues with the building. This includes water not working. So there's no bathrooms for staff or customers. This includes the building smelling like sewage, the building being extremely hot or extremely cold, and years of them trying to work with the landlords. And finally, they've had enough, and they're pulling out of it and closing down one of their more busy locations in the Portland metro area because, frankly, the building sucks. But what's really interesting to me is this has been happening for several years now, since this new property management company bought the mall back in 2003, Rhino Investments Group. They bought it for a pretty substantial amount of money. It was more than $40 million. They bought the mall and the surrounding shopping areas and almost immediately evicted the last remaining internal tenants. So small mom and pop shops that were inside the mall with plans to redevelop it. But that redevelopment never happened. And then the 24-hour fitness left. Target and Home Depot, which were connected to the mall, sealed up their internal entrances from the mall. So they're functionally disconnected from the mall now. And now the one remaining thing in the mall is gone. And I'm just like, what is it going to take for them to redevelop this? I'm just, sitting here waiting, seeing what they're going to do with this. But yeah, I'm curious. Did y'all even know Mall 205 was still existing, or it still existed, or that there was a DMV there? Have either of you been to it?
I honestly have never been to Mall 205. I don't think clearly I am part of the problem of the decline of Mall 205. I cannot
it's
even
you,
in
John.
my brain. It's me. If only, if John were to buy one more Wetzel pretzel, we would have been fine.
It's John's fault.
But no, I've never been.
When I first moved to Oregon, that was the DMV I went to. And I remember being like, what the hell? Why is a DMV in the mall? It's awful. I had to go get my real ID there. And the day I went there, it was so hot that I'm sweating through my shirt while I'm waiting to get my photo taken. It's a terrible building. Mm-hmm. The landlords have not done a good job of taking care of this thing.
Yeah, I mean, just the note that it was it smelled like poop, basically.
Yeah,
and I'm I'm sorry. Of course, I feel sorry for everyone trying to do their DMV business, but I actually just feel sorry the most for the workers who
100%.
Can't leave poop smell. You go there for an hour and you're just like, fuck this place, I'm going home. Those poor people had to work in 90-degree weather.
Yeah.
You know, it's awful. But
the DMV sucks enough as it is.
Yep.
And then you add all these things to it, and it's like, wow, that must have really been a difficult place to work.
I mean, it is interesting thinking about, where the DMVs are and where they have been. Like there used to be one at the Lloyd Center, which is closed down as well. And then the other places where there's a DMV is like a strip mall in North Portland. You know, 15 years ago, it's like, these are the high traffic areas where everybody is going to do in-person shopping. And that's just not the case anymore.
Wow.
So the DMVs that are built on this model of being in high traffic areas, our patterns as a culture have shifted, and the DMV is struggling to catch up.
There is an interesting thing they're doing. I'm going to sidetrack us a little bit, which is they are turning on vending machines at Fred Meyer locations around the state where you can actually go to the vending machine and renew your tags for your vehicle. So they are the DMV.
That. Yeah.
And I actually saw these when I was back in Ohio. The BMV there has these.
Columbus, Ohio?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Never heard of it.
Land of delicious pizza. They had these, and they were really cool looking. And what I find really fascinating about these ones that the Oregon DMV is going to turn on, they're going to like actually print your license plate number on your tags, which should make tag theft a little bit more difficult.
That's cool.
But little hack to everyone, just score your tag with like a razor blade. Like just make it so that it's really hard to peel off. Stop just sticking it on there like a water bottle sticker.
That's really cool. Can I quickly read you a note that a listener wrote in about the DMV at the 205 Mall, which, by the way, Bryan, you explained why it was called the 205 Mall, because I think I started going to that Home Depot once it was closed. So I was like, why is this called the 205 Mall? I didn't know they all connected.
Yeah, it used to be one building.
So thank you for that piece of lore that I just never knew. I feel bad about that. Anyhow, Matt wrote, I write to you as a person who tried to get a real ID during my winter break, only to have the DMV cancel the appointment due to facilities issues. So we're thinking it's poop, right? Now they say that it will take a year to find a new location, as if there aren't vacant buildings. And this is this is important. 10 E's. Everywhere. I am very pro-government, but what is it going to take to make these problems take less than a year of costly studies? We stood up COVID tests and vaccinations at the convention center in a few weeks. Surely we can do better for the equally urgent real ID problem. P.S. Yes, I'm also writing my legislative reps. So thank you, Matt, for writing in first here. I'm assuming you ran first here and then you ran off to your reps, which
that's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Thank you for that priority. Well, Matt, there's an idea that's already in play up in British Columbia. It's called a speculation and vacancy tax that we could do that could tackle some of these empty buildings. We have a lot of property owners in the Portland metro area who are sitting on vacant properties like Mall 205, like this beautiful new construction building on the corner of Division and 82nd for purely speculative reasons. They're writing off the tax losses, but they're sitting on it because the hope is that they can eventually get someone to pay them more for it. While we have plenty of businesses who are struggling to find affordable rents, plenty of people who are struggling to find affordable places to live, we have a horrible housing crisis in our state. There is a model out there that works, which is you make it costly for a business owner to choose vacancy over renting at a reasonable market rate. We could tax these property owners and make it painful to them to choose that model. We should start penalizing them, taxing them.
Two things about that, Bryan. One, I wish that I didn't have a real job because that would be my tag. That whole thing you just said would be my tag, and I would put it everywhere in a vacant building, which would be tax these motherfuckers for vacancies. But two, I found out through a developer why that happens. And it's because most of these developments, they don't own these buildings outright. It's the bank that owns them, right?
Yeah.
So they got a loan from a speculation of how much they were going to charge for rent. When that dips, it devalues the building, it devalues the loan, and the bank doesn't allow it. So it's a back and forth between the bank and the actual, I'm not saying, poor developers. I'm just saying, it's our system. Our system is screwed because banks own everything.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that works in other countries where, because please, let's tax them.
I don't know. One thing that's interesting, though, is the Canadian system is different. You don't get 30-year mortgages up there. You have to refinance your mortgage every 5 years. It's just the way the laws work up there.
Well, I need to go to a meta level of this conversation, but at the same time, we have a chat going along with our senior producer, Julia Fiaioni. And Julia
Who is Canadian.
who is Canadian and who just piped in, I went to get a new driver's license and actually loved it. Julia is a DMV booster.
They exist.
Julia says she went in the winter, so it didn't smell. But I was in and out in 20 minutes, and all the workers were so kind. And I just hung out in Montevilla afterwards. I love Montevilla. So
Montevilla rocks.
I love it.
Thumbs
She's
up for the
"And
DMV.
I love
thumbs up
Montevilla."
for Montevilla. Julia's bringing the positivity. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Julia. Well, Bryan, thank you for bringing us, I believe, a very personal story, honestly.
Oh, yeah. I sweated at that DMV.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, more headlines of the week. All right, so now on to my story. I have to say, picking just one headline to share this week was rough. As you guys know, there's just so much happening right now, from startling tax levy proposals to soul-crushing public school budget cuts. Everything just feels important and share-worthy. But because we care about your mental health, and we'll probably end up talking about these things anyways down the road, it was decided that I would get the fun task of presenting the lighter story this week. The palate cleanser, if you will.
The amuse-bouche.
The amuse-bouche. The cheese and fruit. Anyhow, so what I looked into was the James Beard Awards semifinalists, which were announced this Wednesday. And if you don't know, the James Beard Awards are often called the Oscars of the food world, as Oregonian food writer and restaurant critic Michael Russell pointed out in his article when he was announcing the winners. So they're a huge deal to our local restaurants because if you win one, it elevates your restaurant and possible future endeavors into a national destination like Cannes.
Yeah.
Also, the award is named after a very famous and influential Portlander that pretty much changed the way Americans think about food, James Beard. So whenever there's a James Beard Award, Portland especially is very excited.
Didn't we do an episode about that once, Claudia?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't
Way
we?
back in the day.
Yeah, which I think we'll link to that episode where we dived into his history with one of his biographers, and it's still one of my personal faves to this day.
Yeah.
No lies. Okay, so per usual, there are several Portland chefs and restaurants nominated throughout the award categories, but something really cool and unsurprising is that in this year's Regional, Northwest, and Pacific Awards, which aren't in the national category, they're just for our region, more of Oregon was represented than ever, including chefs from Ashland, Amity, Eugene, McMinnville. Usually the regional categories, for Northwest and Pacific, it's always like Hawaii, Seattle, Portland. That's it, By Hawaii, I mean like Oahu or Hawaii.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the major metropolitan areas.
Correct. Yeah. So that was really great to see. But back to Portland. So last year, Long Bon was named the country's most outstanding restaurant at the James Beard Foundation Awards. And that's an Earl Ninsom joint. He owns a lot of people's favorite restaurants in town, including Eam, Yawa Rat, and Hot Yai, just to name a few. And this year, Katie Millard's Coquine is in the running for that incredibly coveted award. She's going up against restaurants in New York, San Francisco, and DC. The other incredibly prestigious and sought-after award is Outstanding Chef, and 2 Portland chefs were nominated. Sarah Minnick of Lovely's 50/50, and already 2-time James Beard winner Gabriel Rucker of Les Pigeons and Canard. And it has to be said, to have 2 semifinalists from the same city, our size, our little city, is wild.
Yeah.
In other national categories for Outstanding Bakery, Jinju Patisserie on North Williams received its 2nd consecutive nomination. Scott Lodge is up there for Outstanding Bar, and Joel Gunderson of Heavenly Creatures was nominated for a brand new category, Outstanding Professional in Beverage Service. Again, these awards are a really big deal for the food world. The ones I just stated are national. So we're going against everyone. So even getting
We're
nominated.
going against Columbus, Ohio for this
Oh
award.
my God.
Do not sleep on Flavortown, y'all.
Okay.
Do not sleep on Flavortown.
So what I'm saying is even getting nominated is huge. So what do you guys think? Any surprises? Any favorites to win
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts about this. I mean, right off, I was just really happy to see Coquine get that nod because,
same.
we had the owner of Coquine on the show at one point as well. And we were talking about just how hard the COVID bounce back was for their business. And like even operating at what is clearly a super, super high level of how challenging it is just to make the money work in a business like this. So I'm just really happy to see that they're getting that attention.
It's like seriously 2 of the best meals I've ever had in my life came from there. I still like dream about this one dish they made that had like crispy puffed rice mixed in with like roasted vegetables and roasted chicken served over top. That was just like one of the best things I've ever eaten in my life. So it's awesome to see that, she's getting some much deserved recognition. And I really hope she wins, but also Sarah from Lovely's 50/50. Like she's gotten a lot of press over the years for her really inventive and creative approach to what is basically pizza.
Yeah. She changed the game, I think.
She really did. She really did.
I
think like, Portland's famous for having a bunch of pizza, a bunch of really good pizza. But if we had to say like, what is a uniquely Portland pizza? It's what she makes. It's this sourdough crust. It is seasonal, hyper local. I mean, I've seen her at farmers markets picking up stuff for pizzas. And even her ice cream is like some of the best in a city, in a state that makes amazing ice cream. Like she really holds her own there. Like her salads are amazing and just so thoughtful. Her soups, like she really is an outstanding chef. And so to see her up there is just really, really awesome.
I think James Beard would personally just give her the award. I
right.
feel like she embodies
She's beard core.
Everything that he stood for. Yeah.
Like pizza is it's considered a casual American food, even though it comes of Italian origins, but it's America, so of course. Yeah. And that's something that he loved. He loved casual American food, but elevated with seasonal and like handcrafted, because he grew up here. Yeah. He grew up in this area, and he's just like, you get the cheese from the cheese making people, Yeah. And I don't know. I'm like, that's Sarah Minnick. Come on.
Yeah. She is like the living embodiment of localism when it comes to food in Portland.
Yeah.
And speaking of local, just real quick, I didn't mention that there is the best chef category for Northwest and Pacific. I mean, I know I loosely mentioned, hey, Oregon was like all over the place, which we are. But Thomas Pisha Duffley from Gado Gado is nominated, and so is Ryan Roadhouse from Nodoguro, which is an omakase place. I know Michael Russell has brought it up many times.
My wife is obsessed with it. She's been so many times. I don't eat sushi, so it's not worth me going. It's supposed to be like some of the best sushi you can get in the world. So,
But John, what were you going to say?
What's going on in McMinnville, man?
Dude.
Speaking of places in the metro area I've never been, man, McMinnville? Really?
It's Carrie Shaughnessy of Hayward and Sarah Schaefer of Humble Spirit. And this is after that super fancy restaurant Octa closed its doors just this past year, which was like getting headlines from around the world for their like impressive approach to like local cuisine. McMinnville really punches above its weight class. Like there are some amazing restaurants in McMinnville. La Rambla is like easily the best tapas in the entire state of Oregon. I will fight people over that.
You go to McMinnville to eat. That's great.
I go to McMinnville to eat. Yeah.
CityCast Portland road trip.
Do it.
Going to McMinnville.
And lots of wine there for Claudia and
To our
John.
bosses, this is a business expense. This is research.
John, did you hear how Brian sold it to us? He's like, lots of wine for you two winos.
Lots of wine.
Oh, well then.
We're sold.
I know. Well, the announcement of the winners will happen in June. And it's going to take place in Chicago. That's usually where it takes place. So yeah, good luck to everyone nominated. But I'm going to light some extra candles for Katie Millard and Sarah Minnick.
Yeah.
They've just always been nominated and like never win.
Yeah. So maybe this is the year.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me and going over through some of the headlines this week. Brian, John, always a pleasure. You too.
Thanks, Claudia.
Thanks for having us on.
That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. Our podcast production team this week was John Notarianni and Julia Fiaioni. Our Hey Portland newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, and our host is me, Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Stephen Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.